I'm not forcing you to stay, Machias. You know I cannot leave without you. How could I return and stand before Sigismund without the charge he sent me to retrieve? When will you learn that he does not care about you? Asked the princess. Or I? Do you really believe he'll look upon you with greater favour? He sent you, and the rest of them, because it was something to do. Something to keep you occupied and away from him. You're wrong. He's old and looking for an heir. He has an heir. Johann is old. A kingdom needs stability, you know. If you spend less time running from your duties, you might learn them, Katarzyna. Will you please listen to me and stop tending to the damn turnips? Duties? Was it your duty to kill Mikolaj? The sound of Machias striking Katarzyna across the mouth was so sharp, Casimir imagined he'd seen it with his own eyes. Stone in sling, he charged through the doorway and into Rubizal's garden, where all nature and her slow evolution was on display, dissected and studied with the precise eye of a scientist. Casimir was so astounded that all killing instinct faded away. Merchant appeared by his side. Never had they seen something as wild as herb and flower be so diligently catalogued. No farm or florist could compare to the wire-frame order of Rubizal's abode. At the centre of this space was the widest tree trunk they'd ever seen. It grew tall and disappeared through the roof. Katarzyna was hunched over a cluster of 4 turnips. Her stomach was huge, which Casimir could not believe. She passed his home no more than a week ago. Her face, once perfect and pale, had a strong red handprint across it. Machias spun to see who it was had entered. Machias had grown a full, shaggy beard. It was a miracle the essence of his person peeped through the fur. His cheeks were barely visible. His brows were like 2 hairy caterpillars. His eyes, 2 jewels in a magpie nest. Look, sister! It's the half-breed! I told you he would come to aid me. Now you cannot say no. He reached for his sister's hand. Don't touch me! She howled. You will suffer when my husband returns. The half-breed is so strong he could wrestle your so-called husband into the dirt. I saw your man by the evil eye, said Casimir. I told you not to drink the water. I wanted to see what would happen. The men didn't react all the same way. Patrick could not be dragged from the riverside, even when Mikolaj attacked and parted his head from his body. I flew as fast as I could on my horse, telling him, Fly! Fly like you're supposed to! Lo and behold, he said in mock wonder. Machias whistled. There was a rustling sound as some plants parted. Stepping out of the shadows was Machias's mount. The horse, who'd only been decorated with wings when Casimir first saw him, now had 2 very real wings. The feathered appendages beat heavily. Machias observed his flying racehorse with new admiration. I'd half a mind to turn back myself, just to get a drink. Not to help your men? Asked Katarzyna. They were elite hussars. Frankly, I'm disappointed how few returned from the fray. Johann picked off the stragglers. It was a bloodbath, decried Merchant. Machias's polychromatic eyes snapped at Merchant, who had still not risen to his feet. Merchant felt a horrible pain around his midriff. He felt as though hot chains were burning into his flesh, wrapping around his gut and hooking it downwards. He groaned. He doubled over, his knees buckling, till his head almost touched the ground. When his compulsory bow was complete, Merchant fell to his knees in sweet relief. My bad. I forgot myself. You're my servant, Machias tutted. You're compelled to serve me. Casimir tightened his grip on the sling. Machias, just for a moment, looked afraid. Then he reset himself. Harm me, and your right of favour will be void. Surely this pathetic creature is not worth what your heart seeks. He's nothing special, easily broken. Watch, but don't interfere, lest you want him to suffer. Machias cleared his throat. You there, give me your dirk and pack. I lost all my provisions on the journey, and I need arms and sustenance. A look of terror filled Merchant's face, and then, also, a gleam of recognition. This has happened to him before. Without another word, he threw his pack at the prince. Machias caught it by the strap. Awfully light, he observed. Now, your dirk. Merchant held his sword by the blade and presented the pommel. He was about to hand it over when, clear as panpipes, Katarzyna's voice filled the gardens. Your arms are your own. Merchant's body seized up. He could not move, for he was trapped under the influence of two conflicting spells. Then, the tension left. He sheathed his blade and wordlessly took steps back from the prince. You have some power after all, Katarzyna. We were all so worried there, thinking you were too thin of blood, said Macius, as he found a nice tree to sit under. He rested his head in his hands, looking almost pitiable. Why is this happening to me? He asked. Katarzyna held out a hand to Casimir. Help me up, so that I might get you something cool to drink. You look parched. Casimir helped the pregnant Katarzyna to her feet, and she led him to find nourishment. Merchant watched in hot anger as Prince Macius unbuckled the strap of his pack and rummaged through the contents. Honey, piss, and a box of tinder. He glared up at Merchant. Why am I not surprised? Casimir sliced a plump lemon into thin discs of tourmaline. The tart fragrance tickled his nose and brought a certain joy to the menial tasks Katarzyna set him. He watched her through the corner of his eyes. Her baby bump swayed beneath her fibrous chiffon dress, and he wondered if she had shed that youthful stubbornness to make room for her children. She hovered over her samovar. How does it smell? She asked him. Very good, he responded. It'll go well with lemon. Do you have any sugar cubes? No, I have jaggery there, made from my husband's own date palm. He has a date tree. My husband has many plants and many trees, at least one from every nation of the world. Wait till you taste it. You seem to be doing well here, he said. I like to think so. She looked up at him. I'm thinking of when we first met, when you told me that most men could not survive in the forest, and so I had no chance. To speak truthfully, I had no idea where I'd gone, what berries were safe to eat, which streams to avoid, or how to distinguish a beehive from a wasp's nest. I will not pretend I found life easy here. My husband found me dying from poisoning. He saved me. Now, I'm learning the ways of the forest too. Casimir stayed quiet and listened. I do not know yet how to feel about the way you spoke to me, but I've decided I'm grateful for what you tried to do. And what is it you think I tried to do, Princess Katarzyna? You tried to care for me, even when you were not compelled by magic to do so. You cared because it's in your nature. That is a special thing indeed. Come, the tea is ready. My husband should be back soon, or so a songbird told me. Katarzyna took a cube of jaggery and pressed it between her teeth. This was called tea with a bite, and once she'd taken her first sip, the rest of the men followed suit. They bit onto the date sugar, took a sip of the tea and swallowed. It was sweet, tangy and strong. Then a silence fell on the party. Merchant was still angry about being robbed a second time. Casimir was thinking of his mother, and Macius could not speak to his sister as he wished, for he was in oppressive company. Katarzyna produced a tray of cakes, and all took one and began chewing as slowly as possible. Moaned Macius. Delicious, said Merchant. Lovely, said Casimir. Oh, said Katarzyna. I think I hear footsteps. She rose to her feet and walked over to the arched doorway. Rubazal slipped in like a leaf in flight. He wore a cloak made from autumnal broad leaves, and this made him look like a flame atronach. His hair was sleek black, blacker than black ice, jet like the dark of sleep. He dropped a basket of beautiful meat cuts onto the floor and took his wife's hand. Casimir rose to his feet to greet the host, as did Merchant. Macius remained firmly seated. The prince took a cube of jaggery and slipped it into his mouth. He crushed the cube with his molars and sucked. We have guests, said Rubazal. He disrobed with a flourish, and as the flash of red leaf faded and was folded like a blanket over one long arm, Casimir saw to his surprise a number of agate stones decorating the giant's right hand. His new wife kissed him on his cheek, a sweet and chaste affair. Before she could retract her mouth, the giant grasped it securely in his hand. He turned her face, eyed the bruise, and frowned. Princess Katarzyna took his fiery shawl without another word. She licked her lips in timid trepidation. Rubezahl approached the dinner party. He glided past the stalls and stopped before Machias. The prince looked up at Rubezahl's eyes, blue and green, wavering against two hot burning coals, up at the beard, so reminiscent of the ace of spades, but turned over. Casimir thought Machias might remain seated in defiance, but surely enough, he too rose to his feet in the end. None could deny who was the strongest man in the room, and it was not a man, it was Rubezahl. "Greetings, brother." Ah! Rubezahl struck him hard and flat against the mouth. Prince Machias crumpled to a heap and tried to hold back the tears. Blood poured out from a burst lip, faster than arrows from a marksman's quiver, and landed on the carpet like beads of amber. Rubezahl then stepped to Machias' side. "My apologies, guests, but he had struck my betrothed. Might I know your names? Not more family, I hope. Although you, at least," he said, referring to Casimir, "must be a Sarkeesian." Merchant looked between Rubezahl and Casimir, and gulped. "My name's Casimir." Casimir held out his ring-laden hand. The giant responded in kind. Both hands grasped each other. They had a similar shape. Together, they looked like a breadbasket of semi-precious stones. Rubezahl turned Casimir's hand over and stared hard and quietly at each ring. "Lord Rubezahl, is something the matter?" asked Casimir. Still looking at the rings, Rubezahl said, "I recognize these. I left them as a gift to a friend once." "A woman?" asked Casimir. "About yea tall, blonde of hair, pale of skin. Bright of eyes, bright in spirit too. What happened to her?" asked Rubezahl as he took a seat. Machias scrambled back onto his own chair, still holding back tears. Merchant remained deathly quiet, trying to process what he was witnessing. Intervening on Casimir's behalf seemed a bad idea, so he let his friend take the lead. Nothing. She just needed a bit of coin, and so I purchased these off her." "I hope you paid her a fair price," said Rubezahl, a subtle tone of threat coming through his soft voice. "More than fair. She'll be comfortable for a time." Rubezahl stroked his beard down to the well-oiled point. "I'd be happy to purchase them back from you," said Rubezahl. Was she really so desperate for coin? "Shouldn't there be a child?" he asked after a pause. "A child?" repeated Casimir innocently. "Yes, a boy or a girl, perchance." "Not that I could be sure of," Casimir lied. "Why? Was she with child when you met her?" "No, I met her during dark times. I tried to help her as much as I could, all things considered. She'd just lost her husband, of some years to Sarkeesians." "Were you in the habit of helping widows?" asked Casimir. "Hardly an appropriate question for your host," chastised Katarzyna. "I was in the habit of helping whoever needed it. Many children were lost during the war, famine, sickness, murder. I did what I could to help your people rebuild, because I pitied them," Rubezahl muttered calmly. "I left the farmers with farmhands, the smithy with an apprentice, the old lord with a young lady to inherit his wealth." "That would have been Lord Tarankov," injected Katarzyna. "Sigismund spoke of him often, and how it was a shame his house was coming to an end. Apparently House Tarankov always produced good knights." "Yes, I often wonder if I should have helped him. No doubt his children would kill many people, but I'm no soothsayer. The woman who lived on the edge of Sigismund's capital asked only for a baby, no other specifications. She said she had been trying for a baby with her husband, but the recent events had left her incapable of having one by natural means, or so she thought." Casimir rubbed his knees with his hands. "I don't understand. You just left them all with apprentices and fishers. Where did you find these people to rebuild Capital?" "I grew them, of course. replied Rubizal, as if it was the most normal of responses one could imagine. Turnips, under the right conditions and spells, become mandrakes, interrupted Merchant. You know of magical plants? Asked Rubizal in excitement. I've heard of them. They're prized after by sorcerers for their rarity, he said, skepticism dripping from his every word. Indeed they are, nodded Rubizal. Mandrake have shape-shifting capabilities. They also have a natural predisposition for taking the shape of men, which is to say, they like to become them. A few you can convince with the right song to become a dog or a cow, but once they pick, they cannot go back. Do mandrakes live a very long time? Asked Casimir. They can. Shape-shifting is a tricky thing. Your mind is not entirely separate from your body. So the longer you live as, say, a dog, the more dog-like your mind turns. Eventually, you'll forget that you were ever anything else. Some people need their children to be of their blood. So, you plant a mandrake in the soil, add a little blood, and keep it near a woman's bed. And she shall be pregnant in no time at all. That usually results in a child much like the mother. A girl, same hair, same eyes, same wants, and tics. But she didn't want a girl. She wanted a boy. The best thing to do then is to get a donor and mix 2 drops of blood, a woman and a man's. But she had no man, so... Rubizal trailed off. She found someone's blood in the end. So, this child of hers is unnatural. Define natural, Rubizal shot back. Fair enough, conceded Casimir. Is the donor the child's father? If an impotent man asks his brother to help him sire a child, who is the father? So after giving you blood, you just left. She did not want me. She wanted a son. I do not stay where I am not wanted, young man. I live a lonely life. I have for a long time. Katarzyna is not my first wife, but she is the first to stay of her own will. Not many can stomach a life of solitude in my gardens. Where are your parents, Rubizal? My father is the mountain. My mother is Matka. They are alive and well. So, did you see a child there? Not at all, sighed Casimir. The turnip must have died. I did warn her to keep it safe, where none could get it, to keep it nice and buried. Mandrakes like to be in soil. Fascinating plants they are. They do not need sunlight to live. Rubizal spoke about his gardening for nigh on half an hour. Casimir listened, and Katarzyna tended to her own garden of turnips, who in this very moment were growing within her womb. For dinner, Casimir offered up the last of the sausages, the bread, cheese and fruit. Rubizal cooked the apples and pears down to a golden, molten texture, and fried the sausages in oil and fruit sauce. They ate it with potatoes, during a dinner where the conversation revolved around Rubizal's ostensive kidnapping of Katarzyna. I mean, you say you're civilized, said Macias. I do not say I'm civilized. My actions are evidence enough. I'm learned, wealthy, powerful. I truly rule my kingdom. Whereas you are the great-great-great-grandson of a king who shows no sign of dying. A king who hasn't stepped foot in the wild for 100 years, perhaps? You speak treasonously. This forest and everything inside it belongs to our family. You can try and take it, teased Rubizal. I just might, laughed Macias. Rubizal took a bite of sausage. With his mouth still full, he then added that, if Katarzyna's children grow to a ripe age, maybe they'll become kings and queens of Samarta. By their mother, they will rule the sea and the mountains. By me, they will rule the forests and the mines. Mines? Asked Macias, a tilt in his voice. What mines? You see? Asked Rubizal, pointing his spoon at the prince. He says he's a master of my kingdom, but he does not know of the mines. Deep, beneath the forest. Rubizal stomped his heel against the floor. Well, said Macias, you fashion yourself a king of the wild. A king does not simply take a princess. True kings engage in trade, in bartering. You must pay your dowry. Is this not true? The rhythmic chewing coming from Rubizal's mouth slowed right down. Perhaps, he admitted. Katarzyna, at this time drinking more tea, listened close. Well, you cannot simply steal my sister. A dowry must be paid, a good trade. Nothing exceeding her value, mind you. Some of these mines you mentioned, do they produce precious things? Indeed. Gold? Said Rubizal. And silver. Silver? Smiled Macias. No doubt Sigismund would approve of such a trade. Katarzyna is worth no more than a mine of silver and a mine of gold. Rubizal thought hard. It does not seem unfair. He turned to his wife. But I did not know she was a princess when I found her. Would you not say she relinquished this role of princess when she threw her crown from her head? What he thinks has nothing to do with me, she said. This is also true, said Rubizal. I'll leave it to you then, he said, peering at his wife. If you would like to partake in this trade, I have it well within my means. Attention passed to Katarzyna. She took one last sip of tea and put the glass down into its holder. She thought a while longer. I left Sigismund's palace because I was tired of being bound by walls, bound by his magic. I threw my iron band before Casimir's house, and I came here. Despite being warned, well, when I met this giant, kidnapper of women and planter of turnips, I found that he was quite amicable, charming, intelligent, strong. I chose to stay here. I chose the wild. I turned my back on the castle years before I had the courage to leave it. So no, I do not consider myself a queen, nor do I consider myself something worth trading. I'm just a woman. I chose to be here. As she spoke the words, her sound became strange. The plosives and consonants, the hard T's, the strange Q's, all became metallic and sonorous. Hearing it was painful. Deep heat in the shape of a pick began to push itself into the base of Casimir's skull. Her hair, the stray ones and the thick curls too, began to rise up. She blinked, and the colours of her eyes were a deep violet. She blinked again, and the sign of that magic she had used not long before faded to a pretty blue. Katarzyna was breathless. Her eyes were glassy with pain of relief. She smiled, and some tears fell, but she wiped them away. And now that I've disowned you, Prince Macias, last of the line of Sigismund, I would ask you to leave my home come morning time. What did she just do? Gasped Casimir. She broke the chain that bound her to Sigismund, whispered Merchant. She is no longer a princess. She has lost her value, hissed Macias. Hardly, responded Rubizal. She's a free woman. What is that worth? Asked Macias. Perhaps everything, said Merchant. Mostly nothing, insisted Prince Macias, with the look of a man who was losing things day by day. Casimir and Merchant lay down beneath some warm ferns. They did not need blankets. Their bellies were warm with tea and a nightcap of vodka. They listened to the soft churning of Rubizal's herbal remedies, and imagined how far the river had to travel to reach the edge of his forest. We shall have to leave in the morn. Get that waste of space back to Sigismund. Then you'll have fulfilled your bargain, right? You only promised to get him back. You said nothing about the princess. Or Miss Katarzyna. You are right, but I don't want anything from him. To be honest, I don't know what I want anymore. When I'd left my mother's farm, I was a Saracesian bastard. But now, I know I have no Eastern blood. I think I have Giant's blood. My blood goes deeper and further back into the history of this land than Sigismund's. Wait a minute, said Merchant, as he turned over on his stomach. You didn't believe him, did you? Why wouldn't I? I don't know. Even as far as magic goes, mandrakes are poorly understood. They're rare. This man acts like he has hundreds of them. Look, I'll believe you're a giant bloody turnip, when I set my eyes on a giant bloody turnip. Casimir laughed. When you put it like that. You've worked your mother's land for years, Casimir. Have you ever found a bloody turnip older than 20 summers? No, it would be quite a sight. A glorious sight. A shame, then, that no such giant turnip has been found. said Merchant in a huff. By the gods, if I had known things had become as strange here as it is, I would have stayed in the east. They spoke like that for a long time. They laughed and looked forward to returning home. Casimir would take care of the farm, and Merchant would make amends with his father. The princes, or those who remained, would return their attention to pleasing Sigismund in other ways. Nobody noticed Machias creeping his way to the base of the old tree. See, he paid great attention to Rubazar when he was lecturing at the dinner party on the properties of mandrakes, and noticed something strange. It was vast like a tree, but its surface was soft and waxy. He reached into Merchant's bag and procured the flint and fuel. He struck the flint, and sparks flew. First, they smelled smoke. Then, they heard Rubazar's choked gasping, the sound of him struggling, clutching at his heart. "It burns!" Katarzyna screamed. Casimir leapt up and charged towards their private quarters. Straight away they could feel the heat and taste the smog. He ran through trees and stopped when he saw. Machias had Katarzyna by the arm. Deep red blood poured from between her legs and down the white chiffon dress. He was dragging her towards his Pegasus. As she moved, being forced to by her brother, more blood trailed behind. "What did you do?" she cried. "Be quiet. You'll be fine. Get on the horse and behave, you stupid little girl." With a squat and a raise, he set her onto the horse in such a way that she was not straddling it. He climbed on quickly after. "Move, and I'll crush you," roared Casimir. "Swing that stupid belt of yours, and I will cut her open," warned Machias, holding up Katarzyna's kitchen knife. Casimir reached for one of his rocks. "Don't test me," screamed Machias. "Maybe you should help the giant. He looks hot." Machias barked out laughter. Then he kicked his mount with his spurs, and the Pegasus moved swifter than any regular horse. "Here you go," said Machias. "Maybe your piss will help." He threw down Merchant's pack. It looked pathetic. It looked empty. "Casimir," called Merchant. "He's dying. Bring me the satchel." Casimir took the satchel and brought it to the Merchant, who was hunkered over Rubazar, now coughing up black smoke. Merchant produced the jar of nectar. "Praise the gods for stupid people." He dipped a finger into the golden syrup. "Open your mouth, Rubazar. This will save you. It's nectar from Azir." "No! Save the children!" he wheezed. "Please!" He pointed back from where they'd come, back to his garden, where the night before Katarzyna had been tending her patch of turnips. Casimir pulled the mandrakes from the soil, and the burning, scalding, dying half-children screamed. Casimir brought the lot of them, 4 to be precise, to Merchant. As he dropped them onto the soft soil, he discovered that 2 were already dead. Merchant pushed the dead mandrakes aside and poured the entirety of the nectar on those writhing remainers. The fire was out in a heartbeat. The crying mandrakes stopped crying. They whimpered until, before their eyes, the mandrakes began to heal. Eventually, even the whimpering came to an end. "Dig out as much soil as you can," said Merchant, as he piled soil into his bag. "Actual mandrakes!" he yelled as he did so. That bastard was going to kill a garden of actual mandrakes. Once his satchel was full, he tucked the babes into the dark soil, and they clung to it with desperate affection. He took the pheromones and put them in his pocket. "Go to Katarzyna. I'll be close behind. We need to put the fires out," he said, running in the direction of Rubazar's herbal reservoir. Outside, Katarzyna was struggling with Machias. "Behave!" he roared, but she would not. Casimir slid through the opening. He jumped up onto his feet, and then placed a rock into the pad of his sling. He began twirling the leather thong, building up pressure till his arm muscles were bulging. But, just as he was about to release a shot, a bolt flew between the 2 trees and sank itself between Machias's eyes. Casimir watched the prince's head whip back, the shaft of the bolt clear in the morning night. "Johann," thought Casimir. Casimir heard twigs breaking. He felt weight behind him, felt the swing of a sword. He ducked for his life. Clean, cold metal carved a path through the space he was occupying. It cut through his sling. The now useless scraps of leather fell to the ground. Casimir spun, and Johan came into full view. He saw two cold eyes staring down at him, hallowed by a corona of white hair. Johan, like Macias, had polychromatic features. His eyes were purple and gold, an altogether unnatural combination. In another world, Johan might have looked like an angel. In this one, he was the Wild Hunt. Casimir stepped backwards. "You destroyed my sling!" he yelled.
Yes, a shame. I was aiming for your body. I hoped for your hands at least. I can always try again, of course.
The panic set in potent intervals. Johan had a hand-and-a-half sword, 25 inches at least of cold, killing metal. He stood taller than Casimir. Why, he must have been almost 7 foot tall. For the first time in Casimir's short life, he felt emasculated, and more than that, he didn't want to fight him.
You're much smaller up close, half-breed.
Johan took a step forward. Casimir took a twitchy step back.
You look rather adorable. I wish you could see your face right now. See the fear in your eyes. Marvelous how a man's face can change. No more posturing, just terror. Yes, this is how it should be when you meet the firstborn of a god.
You aren't firstborn, you're a runt. Johan's lips pursed shut. He meditated quietly and composed himself.
You won't beat me with words, half-breed.
What could Casimir do? All he had was his shamshir. He drew it. Johan regarded the sword curiously.
An interesting blade. Where did you get it?
He asked, with the poise of a man with time to spare. What? Do you not recognise a shamshir when you see one? Did you spend your days in your mother's lap while your father fought the war against Saracens? Johan licked his aged lips. The wrinkles were motionless, as though his age had been etched into his skin with ink and the fire of experience.
The Saracesians do not fight with a shamshir, you silly mutt. Don't you even know what you're holding?
Johan spoke with such confidence, even more holes were being punched into Casimir's defence. I know what this is, he replied.
You sound unsure, young man. I've seen many swords in Saracens, but none quite like this. Saracesians fight with the Khalij. That's a shamshir from Dari. Didn't your goat fucking father teach you anything?
Johan struck at the half guard of Casimir's sword. The motion was so fast and practiced that all Casimir saw was the briefest change in posture. It felt and sounded like a blacksmith, bringing his hammer down on a bar of iron. Now, Johan was holding his sword in front of him, in line with the armpit crease of his right side. He angled the sword, so the point glistened in the light of the rising sun. Casimir tried frantically to strike Johan 3 times in quick succession. Johan parried each quite easily. A look of deep disappointment filled his face.
I thought you might be at least good exercise. Now I know you aren't even that.
Behind the dueling men, Katarzyna and the Pegasus were being herded by other members of the old guard. Johan jabbed the sword at Casimir's chin, who parried clumsily.
Come,
barked Johan.
Fight! Motka must eat one of us.
Johan's sword thrust like a snake bites its prey. Casimir, in the intoxicating rush of violence, held his sword with 2 hands and brought the blade down as hard as he could, or so he tried. Without really knowing why or how, Johan had an arm around his neck, and his shamshir went clattering to the ground. How? Wondered Casimir. How is this old man so much faster and stronger than I? Johan cuddled him affectionately.
You poor boy. You most definitely are not a Saracesian. A Saracesian would know how to fight. You're not a Sarmatan. For a Sarmatan could never trade blows with me. They're bound by royal magic. Whatever you are, die now. Maybe you'll find your place in death.
Whatever you are, Johan had said. Well, Casimir knew what he was now. Merchant had created some doubt, of course, but Casimir knew the truth. He was a giant. His father could grow to the size of a hill. Why not him? Johan forced Casimir onto his knees and pressed him down into the dirt. He took the position of an executioner. Without another word, he brought the sword down. The sword landed nice and clean in the valley of muscle and meat. Casimir's back ripped open. The hot blood that kept him alive spilled down his back. But it was not so deep or wide in comparison. Casimir's back was growing. What would have killed him but moments ago now proved to be an excruciating annoyance. Johan stumbled back as Casimir grew, swelled, engorged, till he stood twice as tall as Johan. Confidence filled Casimir. This felt right. He should be the largest in the land. That is how he had lived his entire life. Johan grinned.
My family is famous for killing monsters. Half-breed.
With that, Johan struck Casimir with a fatal right hand into the sternum. Casimir was still not finished with his transformation. He felt ribs break. Johan followed with a hook into Casimir's engorged kidney. He dropped low, wrapping his arms around Casimir's hamstring, an easy target if Johan had ever seen one. Yes, he would floor the half-breed, then carve him open to tan his impressive skin. Johan was imagining how it would look, hanging on the wall behind his throne. But then, a rumbling could be heard. Johan could not be sure, but he thought he could smell sweet, aromatic scents. It reminded him of medicine and of perfume. He shook his head free of the intrusive thoughts, focusing on the bulbous monster in his hands, when a 9-foot wave of Rubazal's herbal remedies burst from the tunnel entrance. Johan was knocked off his feet. Merchant barreled through the route entry, and upon seeing Johan, was struck with such a force of magic that he became like a stone.
By the gods!
Cried Johan, as Casimir picked him up.
Stop!
Roared the prince.
I've bested you twice over!
Casimir swung Johan by the arms.
Stop!
Demanded Johan.
I command you, stop!
He launched the crown prince into the air and in the direction of his men. Artem and Klitschko had the sense to run, but Valuev, loyal dog that he was, ran into the line of fire. Arms open, he charged, hoping to catch his prince. He shoved his feet into a deep patch of soil, thinking it might anchor him, help stop the momentum of his flying prince.
I must save him if I can.
He did, in a sense. He cushioned Johan's crash landing. Valuev splintered open, like the hull of a ship when it was struck by cannon fire. Blood bathed the grass. His knees were wrenched from their sockets, and while the rest of his corpse flew back, his boots and feet stayed where they were, stuck in the mud. It landed in an explosion of blood and soil. When the dirt settled, they saw a confusing heap of things. Mud, soil, grass, iron, and bone. Artem went back to check on his prince. "Prince Johan!" he called. "Prince Johan!" Artem inched towards the crash site. Smoke rose from the superheated metal. There was a sizzling sound. "Prince Johan, I think he's dead. They're both dead. I can't believe it. It took 100 years, but look," he said, one foot on a mound of metal and flesh, finger pointed down. "He's dead. The prince is dead. Long live the prince." A burnt, yet very much alive hand grabbed him around the wrist and pulled him down. "By the gods! Matka's returned them! Vomited them up from hell! Ah!" Using Artem as a counterweight, the injured crown prince wrestled his way free.
I'm not dead or undead, you idiot! Poor Valuev. Oh, why couldn't it have been you? Then I would have only lost one brain.
He spun around and shook an angry red fist in the air.
You!
He roared at Casimir the giant.
You've killed my friend, and now I must flee.
For the second time in Casimir's short life, he watched a rare sight that few could share or comprehend. Crown Prince Johan, the old guard, the wild hunt, the sick prince, the last babe, was fleeing and crying for losing another friend. A pain far greater than he felt even when killing his own family. Merchant picked himself up from the dirt. He walked up to the furious Pegasus, who at this moment was both in pain and terrified. Katarzyna held on for her life, her bloody dress swaying in the motions of the jumping horse. "Of all the things to prove useful today," he muttered to himself. Then he burst out laughing. He unstoppered the jar of piss, and a foul stench filled his nose. He gagged and turned away from it. As he approached, some of the odour caught a ride on a passing breeze. Leaves caught in flight, carried by the crisp, cool wind, became beacons of the stench. Some of the stench flew up to Katarzyna's nostrils, and she was finally sick. But the Pegasus? So intense and intoxicating was the universal pheromones that it quite forgot the pain. He stopped horsing around. He cantered back and forth, shook his mane free and boldly. He sniffed the air. Where was this fertile mare? It was coming from the direction of the man-beast, he who walked on his front legs and grew a mane on his face. Maybe he knew where the mare was. Perhaps he was her guardian and feeder. Maybe he was the one that the fertile mare, in contract, allowed to ride her back. Machias's mount, a truly winged stallion, half trotted, half flew towards Merchant. "Whoa there," said Merchant, as he held out a hand for the horse to sniff. The stallion ignored the gesture and went, instead, snout first, to investigate the source of the lovely aroma. He chuffed, and Merchant, seeing the threat early, stopped the bottle up. "Now, you'll get your lover soon, I promise." He stuffed the bottle of universal pheromones in his pocket, and went to the princess's aid. "Oh, poor girl," he said, as he helped the princess down from the horse's saddle. She smelt of blood and sweat. He turned back to the tunnel he'd crept out of. Dark smoke rose from the egress. He shook his head in sorrow. That marvellous garden was half dead now. He looked around at the surrounding trees. Who knew what that meant for this place? "Casimir!" he called. Heavy footsteps approached. Merchant tried to prepare himself, but still, it was a shock to see Casimir stand 2 inches above 14 feet. "By the gods," he muttered. "You were big enough before. Can't you get back down to a more stomachable height?" Casimir looked at his bare poor hands. "I don't know. I haven't tried yet. My father could." "Go ahead, try. Else you won't be able to come along." "We can't all three ride the Pegasus," he responded. Merchant nodded. "I can maybe make something. Tree bark and dull pain when chewed." "You take her then. Keep her alive. And get her to my mother. I'll try to get back as quickly as I can." "What do we do about the bodies?" asked Merchant. "We've left enough just hanging around." Casimir looked at the damp cave. "Fire." Merchant, after administering the bark and weeds to the princess, cut strands of her dress and turned them into a brace for easier travel. He cleaned as much as he could. The rest, Mother would have to take care of. "Take care, Casimir. We'll see you soon, I hope." Casimir headed into Rubazal's chambers to assess the damage. Merchant climbed onto the Pegasus, and he kicked it with his boots. The winged horse charged. From a sprint he began to fly and disappeared above the trees. Casimir returned in spring. He found Mother and Merchant planting seeds. They were hard at work, preparing the next year's harvest. He stepped through the gate, wordlessly, and waved hello. Mother's neck snapped up. She rose to her feet and said, "I was wondering when you'd get back. There's work to do." "How's Katarzyna?" he asked. Mother wiped her hands on her apron. "2 of her babies were born dead." She shook her head. "But 2 lived. Strong, healthy children. She's busy with them. Maybe too busy to think about all that's happened to her. She'll need time." Casimir eyed the soil and the vines dubiously. "Where did you bury the mandrakes?" he asked. Mother suddenly grew very quiet. Merchant rose to his own feet and stretched his back. "They're still in my satchel. I reckon they'll be fine till the end of spring, after which we can put them somewhere better." "Yes, well, a strange thing if ever I've seen it," said Mother, sheepishly. "Just give them to Mother," suggested Casimir calmly. She'd know where to put them. Mother looked annoyed. I don't know anything about them. Casimir frowned. Why are you lying? Lying? She barked. Lying? What could I possibly be lying about? I met Rubazal. I've been living with him. He told me what you did, Mother. I'm not angry or even upset. I'm a... What? She asked. A magic turnip? You are no turnip, she yelled, throwing a tantrum. You are my son. You came from here, she said, touching her womb. Casimir tried to stay calm. He did not understand his mother. He did not understand how she could be so obstinate, how she could lie so much, or even why she insisted he was normal. What's in the shepherd's box? Nothing, she huffed. So, you won't mind me opening it? I've already told you, no, you can't. And I've listened to you for many years. But now... Casimir ran into the house. No! Cried his mother. Why are you doing this? Merchant, stop him! Merchant was already halfway to the house. He followed Casimir and slid to a halt beside him. He looked at the box greedily. Oh, what are you waiting for? Casimir undid the bolts and threw the lid up. They both looked in. Mother was in the room now. She was about to scream, but the heat resided. She took in a deep breath and exhaled. Fine. Do what you want. Merchant leaned in a little closer. So it's true then, for more than 20 summers. The box was filled with soil. Poking out of the bed were 3 stalks of pale golden leaves. They swayed here and there, like dancers, till they felt the warmth and heat of the daylight. The stalks swerved around nervously. How do you feel? Asked Merchant. Casimir closed the lid and sat cross-legged. I feel fine, he said. Really? Asked his mother. Yes, affirmed Casimir. I know who I am. I'm not a Saracesian. I am a turnip.